You guys seem to really enjoy my series idea, A Closer Look, so I decided that I'm actually going to commit to this idea and do videos like this periodically. I put a lot more information in this one for you guys because this particular ethnic group really deserves it. For the record, this was the most difficult video I've ever had to do, and hopefully you'll understand why I say that in the end. As always, if you want access to sources, courses, exclusive videos, or if you simply want to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. The Haratin are an ethnic group in Western Africa, largely found in the area of Mauritania and Morocco. They make about 40% of Mauritania's overall population and are considered its largest ethnic group. Overall, the history of the Haratin is a mixture of controversy, glory, and a lot of pain. I would make the argument that the Haratin are the most socially isolated and oppressed group in all of Western Africa, if not Africa itself. In order to truly grasp and understand the oral history of the Haratin, we first have to understand the context in which they speak. The word Haratin has two origins. The first is from the Arab word Haratin, meaning plowman, and the second is based on the Berber word Haratin, referring to dark skin. The identity of the Haratin has always for the most part been juxtaposed to the existence of the Arab Berber population in Mauritania. The Haratin began to exist due to slave raids and slave trading of African ethnic groups locally and further south. These ethnic groups consisted of the Fulani, Soninka, Bambara, Wolof, and others. Over time, through the consistent slave trading and collection of the enslaved Africans, a distinct African ethnic group began to emerge, now called the Haratin. Thus today, the Haratin are a combination of the before-mentioned African ethnic groups. Due to the legacy of slavery in that part of Africa, many of them have varying levels of Arab-Berber ancestry. Ironically, the history of the Haratin is very similar to the history of African Americans. One of the few exceptions is that one group of Africans were oppressed in America amongst Europeans, and the other oppressed in Africa amongst Arab-Berber populations. Over time, the Haratin began to speak Arabic and adopt nearly in totality the culture of the people who enslaved them. So it's in this context that we must understand the oral history of the Haratin. Their oral history goes as follows. The Haratin claim that they were the valley's first inhabitants and say that the whites, originally nomads, came later to abuse their hospitality and treat them as slaves. So in this context, the Haratin are talking about their black ancestors who of course did not identify as Haratin but were black Africans in the region before the Arab or the Berber, according to them. In Mauritanian society, to some degree, there is this white and black dichotomy in which the Arab and Berber culture is seen as white, usually no matter the phenotype. And thus, those who don't accommodate this culture is pretty much viewed as other or even black. This is not the rule all across the board, but it can be somewhat seen as a foundation. Now the question inevitably becomes, when did the Haratin identity begin to take form? Well, we can start with the Moors, the Almoravids to be exact. Ironically, the Haratin are also frequently called the Black Moors, and there's a reason for that. So please bear with me as I try to explain the origin of the Haratin. Sometime around 1020, a Berber ruler of Adugas converted to Islam. Adugas was a city located in the ancient empire of Wagadu of the Soninka people. Yahya, the successor of this Berber ruler of Adugas, made a pilgrimage to Mecca and met the Islamic cleric Ibn Yasin. Yahya invited the cleric to return to Africa with him to evangelize amongst the Berbers, and this failed miserably. The Berbers exiled Ibn Yasin, who was forced to flee to Tekrur. Now Tekrur was a city in Senegal, and this city housed many African ethnic groups like the Fulani, Soninka, Wolof, and other Mandate groups. In Tekrur, Ibn Yasin founded his Islamic movement, the Almoravids. Berbers and Tekrur converts flocked to his standard, fired up by both Islam and revenge. The Berbers wanted the independence of Adugas from the non-Islamic rule of the Soninka of Ugadu. They also wanted to Islamicize, by force if necessary, the Berbers of the desert. On the other hand, the Tekrur wanted their independence from Wagadu. This match had been made, and by 1055, the Almoravids wrested Adugas from Soninka rule. Once this glorious union of Muslim Berbers and Muslims from the region of Senegal occurred, it was pretty much a wrap for Spain. This is where the ancestors of the Haratin begin to take form, if you will. This period was no doubt the glory days of the Haratin. Now, even though we can consider this part of Haratin history its glory days, technically most of them still carried a slave status, but today they're remembered as the Black Moors in contrast to the White Moors. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, who was the Berber leader of the Almoravids, purchased a body of black slaves to form part of his army. In this year, 1071 through 1072, the might of the Emir Yusuf increased. He bought a body of black slaves and sent them to Spain, where there was bought for him a body of alage. He gave them all mounts, and finally he had a total, paid for with his own money, of 240 cavaliers. Of the slaves, also bought with his own money, he had about 2,000 and mounted them all. He made himself more difficult of access, and his authority waxed mighty. Now, as an addition to his body of black slaves, Yusuf's entire personal bodyguard unit was from Senegal or Tekrur, meaning his personal bodyguard unit consisted of black men from the Fulani, Soninka, Bambara, Wolof, and likely other Mande ethnic groups. The reason why these Berber leaders would have a preference for black slaves in their armies was because these Proto-Haratin black Africans had no Berber tribal affiliation, which meant that their loyalty could be most trusted. It's important to understand that many Moorish dynasties would fight each other just as much as they would fight their enemies, so there was a concern that a full Berber army could easily overthrow their leader. Thus, non-Berber black bodyguards became a strong tradition in the Moroccan regime, and the Haratin formed an elite corps amongst the warriors of the Sultan. But these Proto-Haratin people were slaves with power. They were the warriors and even generals. One of the crucial responsibilities of the Black Army was the physical safety of the Sultan. Germain Moyet, who was captured in Morocco in 1670 and spent 11 years in captivity, observed that the bodyguards of the Sultan were young blacks. He wrote that, and I quote, "The blacks in his army were so imposing because of the confidence that the Sultan has placed in them, that the Moroccans tremble in front of them, and they treated them like lords." Joseph de Leon reported that young men from 10 to 16 years of age formed the personal guards of the Sultan. They were armed and well dressed. They followed the Sultan everywhere he went, and when they became older, they were transferred to the army. His preference for blacks extended their training by teaching young blacks professions normally the responsibility of Arabs and Berbers. One scholar confirmed the Sultan's preferential treatment of the blacks by saying, "Although the natives of his dominions are whites, yet they are not so much esteemed by him as the blacks and the copper-colored, to whom he commits the guard of his person, and is so fond of their breed that he takes care to mix them himself, by often ordering great numbers of people before him, whom he marries. He always yokes his best complexioned subjects to a black helpmate, and the fair lady must take up with a Negro." This is perhaps why Moorish history is somewhat confusing, because the Europeans saw this social and political dynamic between the Black Moors and the so-called White Moors. The Europeans understood that the foundation of stability and power amongst the Almoravids were advanced by the recruitment and enslavement of the so-called Black Moors or Blackamoors. This is why when Europeans illustrated the Moors in painting or sculpture, they frequently used images of black men, because it was black men who validated Moorish power and not necessarily an announcement of the Moors being holistically black. The word plowman, or Haratin, as the Arabs would call them, not only denotes a slave working, but a slave who literally builds empires. These same people, or the Haratin as they're collectively known today, the masters of Spain under the Almoravid dynasty, now found themselves, unfortunately, the object of scorn upon the fall of the Moorish Empire. Wandering through the Sahara after being used as the backbone and symbol of Moorish power, their glorified slave position turned from famed warrior class into destitute beggar and chattel slave after the fall of Moorish glory. There was no transitional period for them, and today, the Haratin are at the bottom of the social ladder in Mauritanian society and continue to be the poorest. Unfortunately, the Haratin exists in a country that still finds it hard to deal with its slaving past. Mauritania was the last country in the world to abolish slavery, and that was in 1981. Oddly enough, it wasn't until 2007 that they actually made the practice a crime, and you pretty much can count the amount of people on one hand who've actually gotten convicted, but mostly receiving a slap on the wrist. The UN claims that about 10 to 20% of Mauritanians are actually slaves. To make matters worse, the Mauritanian government is very inconsistent when it comes to acknowledging that slavery even exists. I have to be honest, I was really surprised about the striking similarities between the history of the Haratin and African Americans, but whereas the torture of slavery had ended for African Americans, it still continues for the Haratin today. I'm pretty straightforward when talking about the dark ages of African people, past or present, but the history and condition of the Haratin, I'm not gonna lie, kinda got to me. I'll give you an example of one enslaved individual who spoke about his experience. Personally, I was always thinking of a safe way to run forever. Then, one day I met a military unit. I spoke to a military man saying, "I'm going with you because I trust you. If you are going to hand me over to these masters, I prefer you shoot me." I think about slavery. Yes, I think about it. Because I can't forget it at all. Because my brothers and sisters are still there. So I can't forget about it. Also, a person like me will never forget about the torture he has suffered. I will not forget it. This quote was taken in 2012. The mere fact that he was willing to take a bullet right there and then, rather than return to his master, speaks volumes into the chattel slavery he must have been experiencing. I can't get into everything in this video because 1, it'll be too long, and 2, I simply don't have the heart to read all those horrors. But there are hundreds of recorded stories about the chattel slavery the Haratin are experiencing right now, at this very moment. If you read the stories about the Haratin and how they're actually bought as children, ripped from their families, sold and even passed down through generations, and how Mauritanian government officials are literally being gifted little Haratin girls as presents, I mean, there's just no words. What breaks my heart all the more is that they seem to be so isolated from the rest of the world. There seems to be little to no international protection or outcry. Now, I know I'm kind of ranting right now, but like I said, this really got to me if I'm going to be, open and honest. But ultimately, I did want to highlight a hero within the Haratin community. He's an activist and a champion in my eyes. His name is Baram Da Abiyid, and he's a Haratin man who's simply not afraid to speak up and act for his people. His story and the story of his father is just absolutely incredible. The story of his father is literally no different from reading a slave narrative straight from the 18th century. Honestly, researching the history of the Haratin and learning about the condition that they're in today, I actually had to take several breaks while doing this video because it was just so much. But I'm all out, guys. I really hope this video will help us in the diaspora at the very least to become aware of the Haratin and perhaps even bridge the gap of communication between our two groups. Who knows? It's your boy Home Team. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.